Welcome to Rewatch or Return, the podcast where we put movies through the ultimate test across 10 universal categories to decide, does it call for a definite rewatch, a definite trip to the return bin, or does our subjectivity cause it to fall somewhere in between? This week, we will look at X-Men 2000, the first X-Men movie that came out in 2000. Today is, well, not today, but this year, 2025, marks the 25th anniversary of X-Men. And so we thought we'd take a look and see what it is like 25 years later. Does it still hold up? What are the thoughts about it now? At least what are my personal thoughts about it, that is. And then you can let me know in the comments on YouTube at least, or on social media, on Instagram, what you think as well. Let's get started with Fast Forward Facts. Directed by Bryan Singer, X-Men premiered in July of 2000 and brought the Marvel mutants to life in a way that fans had only dreamed of. With a budget of around $75 million and a grounded, mature tone, it became a major turning point for the comic book film, especially after the late 90s fallout from flops like Batman and Robin. The casting of the film helped anchor it in legitimacy. Patrick Stewart, already a sci-fi legend from the Star Trek The Next Generation, was born to play Professor Charles Xavier. So much that fans had been fan casting him for years before a script was even written. His counterpart, Magneto, was played by Sir Ian McKellen, who brought Shakespearean gravitas to a character shaped by tragedy and vengeance, and who would, funny enough, also become world famous as Gandalf just a year later. And then there was Hugh Jackman. He wasn't the studio's first choice, or second, or third choice. In fact, Scottish actor Dougray Scott originally had the role, but dropped out due to filming delays with Mission Impossible 2. Jackman, a relatively known Aussie stage actor, stepped in just weeks before filming. His gruff, intense, and layered take on Wolverine made him an instant icon, launching a 17-year run in the role that would become one of the most enduring modern film portrayals, that is, in movie history. Famke Janssen played Jean Grey, a telekinetic mutant and the emotional center of the Xavier team. A former model and Bond girl from GoldenEye, Janssen brought poise, power, and complexity to a role that would take on even greater importance in later films. Her chemistry with both Wolverine and Cyclops added emotional weight to the story. And speaking of Cyclops, he was portrayed by James Marsden, who perfectly captured the square-jawed, straight-arrow team leader. While often criticized by fans for being overshadowed by Wolverine, Marsden's Cyclops embodied the tension between duty and emotion, particularly as the love triangle brewed. Then there's Halle Berry, who stepped into the role of Storm, one of the most powerful mutants in the comics. While her screen time in the first film was limited, Berry's performance helped set her up for greater prominence in the sequels. Fun fact, she's the only X-Men cast member with an Academy Award, which she's won a year later for Monsters Ball. Anna Paquin, who played Rogue, was already an Oscar winner at just 11 years old for The Piano. In X-Men, she played the audience surrogate, a teenager struggling to come to terms with power that isolate her from everybody else. Her relationship with Wolverine added a softer, protective dynamic to Logan's otherwise feral persona. And let's not forget Rebecca Romijn as Mystique, covered head to toe in blue prosthetics and scales that took up to 9 hours to apply. Romijn delivered a silent, slinking performance that turned Mystique into a breakout character. Her physicality and transformation effects were state-of-the-art for the time, and she did most of her own stunt work, too. Despite some fan concerns over the black leather suits, a major departure from the colorful comics, the film struck a chord. It earned over $296 million globally and helped legitimize superhero movies as a serious box office contender. It laid the groundwork not just for a franchise, but for the entire superhero cinematic movement. And here's a last fun fact for you. Kevin Feige, the man who would go on to mastermind the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe, got his start as an associate producer on this very film. So in many ways, X-Men 2000 was the first ripple in the Marvel tidal wave. X-Men didn't just bring mutants to the big screen, it proved that audiences were ready for a more complex, character-driven kind of superhero story, one that still packs a punch 2 decades later. Alright, with that down, let's see what the critics had to say about this one. Looking at the top 10 critics from the critic reviews on Rotten Tomatoes, first let's see Tomato Meter. The critic overall critic rating on this film is 82%, while the audience score on the popcorn meter is 83%. Very, very close between the two, but let's look at the top 10 critics overall and see what they had to say. Jamie Bernard from New York Daily News says, the X-Men comic books have spawned a cottage industry of mutant characters, and the movie helps make sense of these legions while offering the established fan base something new to cheer. Lisa Alspector from Chicago Reader says, exciting mainly because anything can happen and does. The movie drags a bit as it approaches a climax set on top of the Statue of Liberty, but once there, it revives. Stephen Rea from Philadelphia Inquirer says, this is a film that should satisfy fans of the hugely popular comic book and audiences who can't tell one uncanny X-Men from another. Mutants rule, he says. Ann Hornaday from Baltimore Sun says, the movie is respectful of its source material without being the least bit self-important. X-Men may have hit the platonic idea of comic book movies, coming across as lightweight, sophisticated, wacky, and straightforward all at the same time. Stephen Thompson from the AV Club says, the script could be a lot snappier, particularly during some virtually unexplained rivalry banter between Marsden and Jackman, but X-Men is a decent start to what will no doubt be an immensely profitable series of negligible but enjoyable summer movies. David Denby from The New Yorker says, the most beautiful, strange, and exciting comic book movie since the original Batman. Jeff Giles from Newsweek says, X-Men, it must be said, has only a few truly thrilling moments. This is not a picture that tries to blow you out of your seat, but more than any other big movie this summer, it has a consistently inventive vision. Mark Savlov from Austin Chronicle says, of course, the wide-open ending practically shrieks sequel. So rest assured, this is only the beginning of a new super franchise. Here's hoping Joel Schumacher doesn't get his hands on it. That is a little bit funny if you know the whole Batman story and what happened from Burton to Schumacher and ultimately how things ended with Batman and Robin. Dennis Harvey from Variety says, X-Men plays a so-so middle chapter of an epic series rather than a fitting kickoff. Trevor Johnston from Time Out says, apart from the brushed metal production design and pin-sharp camera work, this offers only moderate excitement. And those are your top 10 critics from Rotten Tomatoes. Now, let's move on to first time or 50th. And basically, this is just where we kind of look at, hey, is this the first time you've seen this, or is it the 50th, or somewhere in between, more than likely? How did that influence the viewing of the film this time? So I've seen this movie probably, I don't know, I mean, I would at least 10 to 15, I don't know about 15, 10 to 12 times I've probably seen this movie from start to finish over the years. I would think so anyway. And then there's always, like I always kind of talk about, there's always the amount of times you've seen a film in its entirety, if you can combine all the little chunks and bits and pieces you've seen when it would play on television or things like that. So I've seen this movie, I'd say, in the 10 to 15 time range. I remember it being really, really, really popular. I fully remember the popularity of X-Men when this came out and kind of how it bred a whole new thing. Watching it this time, I was kind of, I didn't know how I was going to feel about it. I have some really good memories about this movie, but I also kind of remember some of the janky effects and wire work stuff and just unrealistic looking stuff. So I was kind of wondering how all that would go. But this is, like I said, I've probably seen this 10 to 15 times if you just kind of add everything together. I don't think it really affected my viewing this time. It's been a long time since I've seen it. I mean, it's been like many, many, many years since I've seen it before I watched it for this. But I would say for those that are interested in comic characters and comic book character movies, that is, you've probably seen this as many times, if not more, than me. Moving along, though, to be continued. Would a sequel work for this film? And if there is a sequel, should there have been? So this one had 2 direct sequels, and then a handful of not direct sequels, but kind of sort of tied in, but it's still the same character, but other people playing the same character, but the same universe. And anyway, but as far as like this film and direct sequels to this film, there were basically 3 films there, 2 direct sequels, and then things kind of stopped for a while. But you had X-Men, obviously, the first one. X2, I think, was X-Men United, and then the last was X-Men The Last Stand. They, to my memory, all were pretty positively accepted. I can remember kind of the huge, epic ending to X-Men The Last Stand and all that. So, yeah, I mean, I think that the sequel, the way that they went about this, I mean, ultimately, I guess, if you want to say should there have been sequels, this being a comic book thing, in many cases, it's very easy to continue on something from the comics because there's so many stories to tell and all that. But this is one that did well. So, yeah, I mean, I guess the determination is, did they do well or did they not do well? Did the sequels do well? They did pretty well. So I would say then yes, they should have. And it's a good thing that they did. And because of that, I think had they not had the other... Well, those 2 original sequels, I don't think, had they done that, everything else that's branched off of that or come out of X-Men since then, theatrically, probably wouldn't have happened if they just made one X-Men movie years and years and years ago. It'd have probably been more of a straight reboot than kind of trying to tie things into the same universe and seeing the movies that we have. So it'd probably end up more like you got one X-Men movie years ago, and then you get another X-Men movie with completely different characters. But, yeah, I mean... It's probably a pretty positive thing that they did what they did with the sequels, and it's probably led us into things that we've been able to see today because of what X-Men did for, you know, the idea and the view of comic book films from then on. Moving with that down. Before we jump into the final segment, today's episode is brought to you by PrepStartsNow.com, your go-to spot for emergency and outdoor preparedness. If you're anything like me, you'd rather be prepared and not need it than need the essentials and not have them. From 72-hour emergency essentials to camping gear, core emergency essentials, multi-tools, first aid, and even home gardening supplies as you start to grow some of your own food, they've got you covered for all of it. And the best part is, as a listener, you can use the promo code REWATCH to get a 15% site-wide discount, and you'll also be helping out the show as they give us a small reward for your business in the process. Head to PrepStartsNow.com/discount/REWATCH. That's PrepStartsNow.com/discount/REWATCH, or simply enter the code REWATCH at checkout and get prepared today. All right, let's do a quick recap of this film. Basically, the film starts out with showing Eric, or Magneto, as a child being in internment camp. And so you understand that he is just like... I mean, so much of this film is a commentary on othering people, right? Discrimination and all that stuff. So... Or seeing others as less than and that kind of thing. So Eric, Magneto, experiences as a kid being treated like less than a person, all that, stripped from his parents and all this. So he experienced that, then grows up and he is a mutant. And so you have basically him and Professor X, or Charles Xavier. You have two guys who you understand knew each other in a way, whether it be college or whatever point they met and they were friends. And one of them is very, basically wants to rule over the people who have othered him his entire life, and mutants, and see them as different and dangerous and all that kind of stuff, and think that they need to be gotten rid of or treated a different way. And then you have Professor Xavier, who thinks that he wants to make that relationship better between the ordinary humans and those who are mutants. So that's the dynamic you have going on between these two. But we are then introduced to Rogue, who has an incident with a boyfriend where she kisses him and nearly kills him because her skin essentially pulls life force or whatever, from somebody. And so she runs away. She runs into Logan or Wolverine, and they end up together. They are driving down the road. They are attacked by some of Magneto's guys, and some of the X-Men show up to rescue them. They take them back to the X mansion, and there is where everything kind of pulls together as far as Logan being introduced to Charles Xavier and him telling him he wants to help him out. And I think he, finally decides that, hey, this guy's for real and he really does want to help. And so you've got them hanging out there. In the process, you've got Magneto going after what seems to be Logan and wanting to, they think, he needs to stay there because Magneto's after him. Ultimately, later on in time, we find out that Logan is not the one that Magneto's after. He's after Rogue because he wants to use her to pull his powers from her to use him. Basically, he wants to use her to control this machine that would pretty much nearly kill him if he did it, but the machine itself puts out this radiation stuff that turns others to mutants or mutates their DNA or whatever you want to call it. So this had earlier been done in the film to a senator who was very against mutants, and he turned him into a mutant, and that guy ended up dying because it was an instant thing rather than this gradual mutation over time, which is more of a natural thing that their body was able to kind of deal with. If you do it so instantly, this guy's body couldn't take it, and it killed him. So the whole plot of the film is Magneto and his guys want to turn everybody that's against mutants into mutants, so then they have nothing to basically say, and they're all, it's like, if I make you like us, then you can't be against us kind of thing, which doesn't make a lot of sense because then they're just going to be mad at you, right? And hate you for what you did to them and see you as dangerous because you did exactly what they said you were dangerous for. So the whole film is essentially one group of mutants wanting to turn those that hate them into mutants themselves, and then you have another group of mutants who are wanting to help the relationships between regular folks and show them that they're not different and they can be trusted and all this kind of stuff. So by the end of it, there is a fight between the mutants as the bad guys with Magneto are attempting to turn all of these world leaders into mutants, and then you have the X-Men stepping in, and they fight at the end, and they try to ultimately destroy this machine that was going to mutate everybody, and they end up winning, the good guys do, and the machine is broken and busted, and none of the world leaders are turned into mutants, and Eric Magneto ends up in prison, in a plastic prison, because he can control metal and all that, and then that's pretty much where it ends, other than you see Mystique has taken the form of this senator who died, that they turned into a mutant. She's now taken the form of him, so she's probably going to go on and pretend to be him and say the things that the mutants would want a leader to say, even though it's not him. It's Mystique pretending to be him. But the end of the movie is basically left almost to be continued, which makes sense. They were looking at probably to move it on. I don't know if at the time they were expecting a sequel, but they did leave it pretty open where there's a lot of possibilities. And then Logan goes and he leaves the mansion at the end going looking for answers to what happened to him and how he was how his body was infused with metal and all that kind of stuff. Probably a little confusing recap there, but if you've seen the movie, then you completely understand that recap probably, and that's the whole point. If you hadn't seen the movie, hopefully you would watch it before you got the recap here, or it would ruin it for you maybe. So anyway, let's move on to the point and purpose of this podcast and this episode, and that is the final verdict. And for the final verdict, we put the film to the test across 10 categories scored on a scale from 1 to 5, and that scale looks like this. 5 is excellent, 4 is good, 3 is fair, 2 is weak, and 1 is poor. And we will look through story and plot, characters and performances, pacing and entertainment value, dialogue and quotability, soundtrack and score, cinematography and visual style, originality and creativity, theme and message, cringe factor, nostalgia, and rewatchability. And then we will add those scores up at the end, and wherever it lands is what it qualifies as on the verdict scale, whether it be certified rewatchable, a leans rewatch, return worthy, or a simple this thing's got to be returned because it is not worth rewatching at all. Let's start out with story and plot. This overall, it's pretty solid. I think it's in that good area. I think that it's a very understandable story, right? You understand that there's these guys who want to do this bad thing to people who are treating them as less than. Anybody who, it's not uncommon to see the story of these people are mistreating me, and so therefore I want to retaliate. You know what I mean? So, but then it's also not uncommon for people who are different and being mistreated to want to show somebody how I'm more like you than you think, and we're not that different. That, you know, we're not so different anyway. So you basically have both sides of that, and this trying to tell that story. I think there's a lot of, this reminds me of like the way that this bounces around. I think that was really my only complaint about this story and plot situation. Not so much the plot, but the it may be more of a pacing thing. I may be judging this in the wrong category here, to be honest with you. But as I'm watching the show, there's some bouncing around that I wish wasn't so much done that way. I've read some comic books where things bounce around to this point, and I'm like, I'll turn the page, and it's a completely different part of the story, different people, different whatever, and I feel like I'm totally pulled out of what I was just reading and stuck into something else, and I don't really care for that when it happens. There's some parts of this film that felt that way. It felt a little disjointed at times, and so I gave this one a 3.9 out of 5, just under good. Because of that, there was just some times where I'm like, oh, hey, where did we go? Where are we going? Where did you just take me? Because we were just here, and now I'm a little thrown off on where you're taking me here, or what's happening. It felt like somebody forgot what was going on and accidentally jumped somewhere else. And so, from a storytelling perspective, I guess if you want to call it, that was threw a little bit off for me. And so I'm putting it at a 3.9, just right under good. Moving on to characters and performances. So that means, or the question here is, are the characters memorable and well acted, or forgettable and flat? These characters are in a way in the world of comic book movies. These are iconic portrayals of these characters. Hugh Jackman is the definitive Wolverine. Will be always, like, no matter where we go with things and who gets cast, who is recast as Wolverine, we will always see Wolverine as being Hugh Jackman, which is odd because when he came in, everybody was like, you know, Wolverine's supposed to be a short little guy and Hugh Jackman's not, and so they were upset at first. A lot of people were that they cast a guy that wasn't a tiny little bitty short guy like they would initially expect Wolverine to be, but he's become this beloved portrayal of the character. And so for his character alone, you could say he pulls enough weight as Wolverine to bring them all in. But I think you got Patrick Stewart as an iconic portrayal of Professor X. You have Ian McKellen. Both of those guys, Hugh Jackman, Patrick Stewart, Ian McKellen, those three alone are very, very incredibly well-trained, you know, like Shakespearean stage actors. So those guys are incredible on their own. And then you have, I think Halle Berry's very memorable in hers. Famke Janssen as Jean Grey, I think, does a fantastic job. Anna Paquin as Rogue, I don't know that there's anything special about her portrayal of Rogue, but it's not necessarily bad either. And then I could go on and talk about the other characters, but ultimately what I have just said, I mean, James Marsden, it's true that James Marsden was like underused. James Marsden is a great actor, and I think he should be bigger than he is. I don't think he gets enough credit for what he brings to things. I've enjoyed him in anything I've ever seen him in. I don't think that he was given enough, even in all of the, that original X-Men trilogy. I don't think he was given enough to do with that character, but everybody does a fantastic job in my opinion. And so I'm giving the characters and performances a 4 out of 5. Pacing and entertainment value. Were you entertained the whole time? Did the movie keep your attention? Does it feel too slow, too rushed, or just right? With the exception of me feeling at times like I was jerked out of one part of the story and just like tossed into something else that jolted me for a minute of like, wait, where am I at and what's going on? With the exception of that, the overall movie is very entertaining. I think it's very well paced. I don't think there's any real dull down points. I don't think any of it's too fast necessarily either. I think there's a good, I think the pacing is done well, and I think it's an entertaining film, just keeping track of the story and what's going on. So I probably would have bumped this up, maybe a little higher than just a 4 out of 5, but I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5 because I do think that the pacing is solid and it is an entertaining film. It's going to get a 4 out of 5 in that category from me. Dialogue and quotability. Are there iconic or memorable lines? Do you still quote it? Does the dialogue feel natural or cringy? There are some, I don't know about iconic or memorable lines. There's some things that are memorable, some things that happen that are memorable. I don't know about any particular lines. I don't think it's necessarily something that is quoted so much. So I don't know about quotability. Does the dialogue feel natural or cringy? I think the dialogue's pretty solid in this. I don't think it's like cringy comic book dialogue. And even the parts that are meant to be a little funny and quippy, whatever, are like feel like they're placed properly. What I mean by like memorable moments, but not so much memorable lines. We're not talking. I mean, this is dialogue and quotability, but there's a part where Cyclops says something, and it's kind of a smart aleck statement to Wolverine, and Wolverine puts his 2 outer claws down and leaves the middle one sticking up, kind of like he's giving him the finger with his claws. And then there is a moment when Mystique is pretending to be like, at the end when they're all fighting each other, and Mystique is pretending to be Wolverine and whoever else. She's taking the form of all these other people, and Wolverine comes back through the door and he's like, it's okay. He tells the rest of them like, it's okay, it's me. And then I think he says, prove it, something along those lines. Cyclops says, prove it, and Logan says, you're a dick. And so like, that's definitely something Logan would say, and not something that you would hear necessarily from Mystique pretending to be him. So like, it's like, okay, yeah, that's you, because he knows their relationship with each other and how they're kind of at each other all the time. So dialogue and quotability, I mean, I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5 just to say that it's good. Not from necessarily a quotable perspective, but from a dialogue perspective, I think it's like solid dialogue. I'm going to give it a 4 and say that it is good. Soundtrack and score. Does the music enhance the film or date it? Does it elevate the emotional tone of the film or feel out of place? Is it iconic or generic? The music does enhance the film. I couldn't hum it to you right now. Okay, so it's not like some over-the-top iconic thing. To me, anyway. It does enhance the film, though. I do remember watching the movie and thinking about the music as I'm watching it and going like, "Hey, this is really solid stuff here." I don't think it dates the film. It puts it definitely in a particular category. It's very common music to that genre, to this genre of film, anyway. Does it elevate the emotional tone of the film? Yeah, I think there's times when it really does do a lot of heavy lifting from an emotional tone perspective. It doesn't feel out of place, I don't think. It's not necessarily iconic, but I don't think it's generic either. So because of that, we're just going to say that it is good and go with a 4 out of 5 for soundtrack and score. Cinematography and visual style. Is it visually engaging or stylish, regardless of effects budget or genre? Do the camera work and effects still impress, or do they look dated or clunky? Here's the one that I struggled with on this movie, because I don't remember it being as bad in some areas as it is. Like, I think that the CG stuff, right, the computer-generated stuff is not that bad, which is what you would expect in 2000. You would think, oh, it's the stuff that they did on the computer that probably wouldn't hold up today. But in reality, what got me and what threw me watching this movie, and I don't remember it being so bad, was like the wire work and the practical stunts that they were doing. So much of it was extremely unnatural in the movements. It was clear that person's on a cable and you're jerking them or pulling them up or doing whatever. The way that people fell, right? Gravity, overall physics of things just like didn't look right to the eye. And it really threw me off watching it. Particularly there's a scene also where Mystique climbs up a pole backwards into like the shadows, but she's upside down and you don't really see her legs doing anything. She's just pushing. She's like climbing up the pole backwards with her arm, with her, upside down, but it looks really funky. It looks like clearly and obviously you're being hoisted up by a cable and you're just doing this with your arms. So I think there's really no excuse for that stuff in 2000. They had everything. I'm not saying that they don't have better capability now for braking and whatever you want, technology that allows them to pull at more natural paces, speeds, or whatever. But there's so much that they could have done, even not having the best technology for these kind of stunts. Then shoot around it, right? Shoot it in a way that it does look right or does look better. So it just became far too unnatural for a movie that you're trying to be grounded on. This is supposed to be a more grounded, gritty, realistic-ish, set more in reality than in, fantasy land. So I would expect you to not let your practical stunts look like they're pulled from Fantasyland. Like there are a lot of these, it was like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon kind of, physics on things. And so I was not impressed with that on this rewatch. And I don't think it was really impressive. A lot of the practical stunts, the visual stuff wasn't not that bad. Even the morphing from Mystique was pretty solid. But we're talking at this point, mid-90s, we were doing solid morphing stuff. So that was done well, but really it was the practical effects that threw me, which is not what you would typically expect from a movie of this era. You would think it would be the CG stuff that was wonky. My only complaint really with the CG stuff was is it Toad, that character that Ray Park has, where his tongue flings out, and I would have left that character out. If I'm doing this and I'm doing a kind of a little more grounded version of this, there's so many characters to choose from. I'd have left that one out because it does feel it does pull things into this almost fantastical, odd thing of like, well, this guy's a frog and got a frog tongue. Like, you might feel different from me than that, but I'd have left that character out. His tongue just at times was like, it was just like way too fake and way too odd, and I would have just not included that character in the film if I couldn't. Well, if I was going to shoot this type of movie and try to ground it in this way. So, cinematography and visual style for me gets a 3.5 out of 5. Because I can't say that it's good. I'm going to say it's between good and fair, because I wouldn't say that it's bad. I wouldn't even necessarily say weak. I just think there was some bad decision making and on what they did with it. And so I'm going to go with a 3.5 out of 5 for cinematography and visual style. Next, moving on to originality and creativity. Does the film feel fresh and inspired, or like something you've seen 100 times? Was the film groundbreaking or formulaic? Does it bring something unique? Does the film feel fresh and inspired? At the time, it was. At the time, it was kind of a new thing. You had seen, as far as superhero movies go, we were Batman 89, right? Which was a more grounded, gritty, dark take on Batman. Then you have 92, Batman Returns comes out. 95, Batman Forever comes out. And 97, I think, Batman and Robin comes out. And it gets more and more comic bookish as Joel Schumacher took over. And we've already talked and kind of hinted at all that stuff. But by the time this came out, there was just comic book movies in general were looked at kind of like everybody kind of turned their nose up at them because of how bad Batman and Robin got. And so when this comes out in 2000, 3 years after Batman and Robin, it was like, oh, this is taking itself seriously. We can take this seriously in a world of that we. You get what I'm trying to say. The movie took itself seriously, though it was based in the comics, and it was a fresh feeling thing, an inspired thing at the time, getting away from sort of the spandex, getting away from the silly, campy, whatever. It's not, I don't think, like something you've seen 100 times. Like I said, at the time, it was kind of bringing in a new thing again, doing its own new thing, and opening the door for this sort of grounded, gritty, trying to set it in a real world tone for these films. Not formulaic, I don't think. I do think it brought something unique. It may not be feeling unique now in the world that we live in the, with the movies that we have now, but knowing at the time and being around at the time when all this went on, it was an original, creative thing, a new and inspired take, and the only difference is it wasn't the first time to do that, right? So Tim Burton was the first one really to come in, and even though Superman 78 was, what do they call it? Verisimilitude, right? It had that, but Batman brought things to a kind of a more gritty, darker tone. So it was really the first one to do that. This sort of followed in the footsteps of, I think, Burton's Batman, though it wasn't Burton-esque in its tone. It was darker and more grounded. So it wasn't the first to do that. Anyway, I say all that to say I'm not going to give this necessarily a 4 on originality and creativity because it wasn't the first, but it was inspired, and I don't think it was formulaic. It was a little unique. So I'm giving it a 3.8 out of 5, almost right there at good, but not quite. Theme and message we'll look at next. Is there a deeper takeaway, or does it explore ideas that resonate today? Well, the thing about the X-Men is the X-Men comics themselves are very much commentaries on things, right? On what was happening even when they were coming out, whether it be racial stuff or whatever. It was a commentary on othering people, on not treating people like less than human simply because they have different skin, or they have a different feature, or they're born with a particular anything. It's very much a commentary on that. And this, if you go to what underlies this in the same way, it's very much a message on the dangers of treating people who are still human, though they may be different than you, in whatever way, to treating them like they're not human, like they should be feared, like they should be whatever. And so, that's a huge message to me. And it does resonate. We live in a world. I'm not trying to get political here, but we do live in a world where politics, all by itself, causes people to not see other people as people. And so, that's the world we live in today, where that seems to be the forefront of seeing other people as not people just because they don't think exactly like you on things, or they see the world a little bit differently. So, yes, this resonates today, and it does have a deeper takeaway. And so I'm going to give this a 5 out of 5 for theme and message, because I think that ultimately it's an important message that we should pick up on and consider. Moving on to cringe factor. Any jokes, effects, or moments that haven't aged well or were always bad. Moments that make you wince now. Campy, cheesy, bad effects, outdated jokes that aren't funny, etc. This, from a cringe perspective, the cringe that came on this was the stunt stuff. It really did take me out of some of the fight scenes. As there's some of the decision making effects wise for me was enough to really drop this down, because of what I know what they were capable of. And so I don't think you should get a pass for bad decision making, even though I think that's what it was. It's not that they weren't capable or that they were bad at, or they didn't have the ability. Like the guys working on this were bad at their job. I don't think that's all. I just think it was some bad decision making and some bad shots and angles and framing and stuff that just completely took me out of this at times, because I was like, oh man, why did you do that? That just looked like some really bad kung fu, throw physics out the window kind of stuff. And so I'm giving this a 3.2 out of 5 on the cringe factor, just because of that. Nostalgia and rewatchability. Does it hold up to your memory of it? Does it still matter today? Is it timeless, or has it aged poorly? Does a rewatch ruin the magic? And would you honestly watch it again? Does it hold up to your memory of it? Not really. I remember it being a overall better film. I'm not saying I didn't like it. I'm just saying it didn't quite hold up to my memory of it. Does it matter today? Yeah. I think it was, one of those first films to step its foot through that door of trying to ground things and take itself seriously as a comic book film. And so I think that matters. I don't think it's a timeless film. I think you could maybe say that the trilogy was timeless. That original X-Men trilogy may be considered timeless. I don't think this is alone a timeless film, even though I do think these are timeless portrayals of these characters, for sure. Has it aged poorly? I don't think the film has aged poorly. I don't think anything necessarily about it has aged poorly. I just think that they made some really bad practical stunt and effects decisions from that perspective. Does a rewatch ruin the magic? A little bit. All the magic wasn't quite there. And would you honestly watch it again? Yeah, I enjoy it enough that I'm going to watch it again. I'm sure over time I'll sit down at times and catch this again and rewatch it and be fine sitting through it, or just sit down for nostalgia's sake alone and rewatch it. So nostalgia and rewatchability for me gets a 3.5 out of 5. Right there between fair and good. And then let's look at the bonus category. Could a theme park ride based on this film make sense? And if so, what kind of ride would it likely be? I didn't I haven't really thought about this until just now. I don't know if this is even worth adding this to the podcast and not cutting it out. But with the X-Men, you have so many cool things that these guys can do, where like I can see them putting you in like the X-plane and doing some kind of thing where you're like riding with them, and it be more of a animatronic, like you're sitting in the X-plane, maybe in the back, and in front you have the animatronic characters doing all their stuff, and you have sort of maybe a screen-based ride. I know people are kind of over the screen-based ride today, but like I can see this being a thing, kind of like where you used to sit down in the DeLorean in Back to the Future, and something along those lines. But where you go in and maybe you have a number of seats in the back of the ship or plane, whatever, but you're not necessarily even supposed to be there. It's just more of like you're a fly on the wall kind of thing. But in front of you, maybe you have so many seats, and your main characters are sitting there, and they're all dressed out, and they're animatronic, and they're talking and moving and doing. And then you have window screens that look like windows, but they're actually screens, and you're watching them fight. And you may, there's very much a story that you could do with that. And I think a thing that would be fun if you did it right. But that's initially where my brain went with that. I don't know. Maybe you have something else that you could think of that would be a cool ride for these guys, and something along the lines of this film. There's some practical stuff that maybe you could do with it. I mean, especially if you leaned into the film itself, which I don't think at this point it would be smart to lean into one of the films, as many X-Men films as there are now. Universal does have the rights to X-Men, so if anybody did it, it would be Universal. I could see them doing something again, like I've said before, like along the lines of the Spider-Man ride, but I don't know how you would do that in the same way. I think the idea of putting you in their plane and having them do something along the lines of what I just said would be the smartest and easiest way to do something with the X-Men. That down, and that said, let's look at the total score and the final verdict to see where this thing fell. Story and plot got a 3.9 out of 5. This is, again, my subjective scoring. You might feel differently. That's what's cool about this. Art is subjective, and we all take it different ways and have different feelings about it. This is just my score on this for fun, and it will be the case for every movie. I'm not saying anybody has to feel just like me on any of these. It's just be a lover of these things, and when you disagree, that's cool. If you liked it even better and still like it even better, that's awesome. Anyway, story and plot got a 3.9 out of 5 from me. Characters and performances, a 4 out of 5. Pacing and entertainment value, a 4 out of 5. Dialogue and quotability, a 4 out of 5. Soundtrack and score, 4 out of 5. Cinematography and visual style, 3.5 out of 5. Originality and creativity, 3.8 out of 5. Theming and message, 5 out of 5. Cringe factor, 3.2 out of 5. Nostalgia and rewatchability, 3.5 out of 5. Making this a total of 38.9 out of 50. And with 30 to 40 being Lean's rewatch, that means that we didn't make certified rewatchable, but this one is high up on the Lean's rewatch, but debatable. I think this is very much to a comic book person and someone who was around when this came out and really enjoyed it. I think it's very much a rewatchable thing. That's why it's in that debatable category, but still it leans towards the rewatch. I would say most people who are comic book fans and fans of superhero movies probably feel the same way, but you may feel differently. I don't know anybody that likes comic book films and superhero films and hates this movie and can't stand it and doesn't like it and doesn't like any of these characters or any of these actors' portrayals of these characters. They're kind of beloved in general. So, this one falls at a 38.9 out of 50. Lean's a rewatch. And maybe we can debate that sometime if you want to. All right, that is the end of. I'm not even sure what number episode this is at this point. I wasn't sure if I'd even get this far along, but here we are, still going week after week, and I hope to keep it going. So, thank you for tuning in. If you are on YouTube, it'd be awesome if you have a comment or let me know your thoughts on the movie. I'd love to know how you felt about it and how you thought. It's not even if something you had to rewatch, but if you can remember your own feelings about it without rewatching it, that's fine too. On Instagram, Rewatch or Return at Instagram. You can hop on there and let me know what you feel and what you think too about this film. I would love to chit chat a little bit about it beyond me just talking basically to the screen here. So I will see you again next week.